My name is Eleanor Morrison. I am 70 years old, a grandmother, a respected woman in my community. To those who see me now, my life must seem ordinary, peaceful. But today I will tell a story I have kept for more than 50 years. A story of love and death. Because you need to know the truth before it's too late. Before they come after me too. On June 15th, 1971, I was a radiant bride walking to the altar. 15 minutes later, I was fleeing the church in my wedding dress, abandoning everything and everyone I knew. People called it a scandal, youthful madness. They didn't know I was saving my life, nor that my escape would condemn 3 other people to death. For decades, I carried this guilt alone. But recently, strange things have started happening. Anonymous letters in my mailbox, phone calls in the middle of the night where I only hear breathing. And 2 weeks ago, I saw a man watching my house. A man who should have been dead for 20 years. So I decided it's time to tell everything. If something happens to me, at least the truth will be recorded. At least you'll know that the deaths in Millfield were no coincidence. Millfield, Illinois, a town where everyone knows everyone, where secrets should be impossible to keep. But Millfield always had something wrong with it. Even before the events of 1971, people whispered about strange things happening there. My grandmother used to say the town was built on cursed land. They said that before colonization, native tribes avoided that region, calling it the place where spirits weep. I always thought they were just small-town superstitions. Until I discovered that since 1971, our small town of 3,000 inhabitants had a suicide and accidental death rate 340% above the national average. And all of them are connected to the day I fled my own wedding. To understand how we reached this nightmare, I need to go back to the summer of 1969. I was 17 years old and had been engaged for a year to James Whitmore. James was perfect, at least on paper. Rich family, promising future as an engineer, charm enough to impress my parents. But there was something about him that made me uneasy, something I couldn't name at the time. He was possessive. He controlled where I went, who I talked to. If I talked to other boys, even just being polite, James would get furious. Not in front of others. He was too smart for that. But when we were alone, once he squeezed my arm so hard, it left purple marks for a week. When my mother asked about the marks, James laughed and said I was too clumsy. Everyone believed him. After all, James Whitmore was a gentleman. It was in this context that I met Daniel Crawford at the summer fair of 1969. Daniel was different. He worked for a company that traveled from town to town selling agricultural products. He had no money, no status, but when he looked at me that first time, I felt something I had never experienced with James. He saw me, really saw me, not as property, not as a trophy, but as a person. When our fingers touched as he handed me a glass of lemonade, it was like electricity. What I didn't know is that Daniel was also running from something much darker than I could imagine. In the first months, our meetings were innocent. Stolen conversations at the fair, glances exchanged in the town square. But as autumn arrived, Daniel began acting strange. He became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder. He said he felt someone was following him. I thought it was jealousy of James. After all, the whole town knew about our engagement. It was in October that he told me about Sarah Mitchell. That was the name of the girl from Daniel's previous town. They had dated for 2 years. Daniel told me she was unstable, obsessive, that when he tried to end the relationship, she threatened to kill herself. And then, one night, Sarah simply disappeared. Daniel said he found her one September morning in her room. She had taken an overdose of sleeping pills. But here's the part that haunts me to this day. He didn't call the ambulance. He didn't call the police. In panic, Daniel carried Sarah's body out of town and buried her in an isolated forest. He swore to me that she was already dead when he found her, that he was just protecting her reputation, avoiding a scandal. I believed him. God forgive me. I believed him. Because I was in love. Because he cried when he told me. Because at 17, I thought love justified anything. What I didn't know is that Sarah's family never stopped looking for her, and they had hired a private detective. During the winter of 1969 and spring of 1970, Daniel and I lived an intense and secret passion. We met in abandoned barns, in the woods behind the school, in the back room of the diner after closing. Each meeting was a risk, but each risk was worth it. With Daniel, I felt alive in a way I had never experienced. He touched me as if I were precious, kissed me as if the world were ending. But as my wedding to James approached, the pressure increased. James began to suspect. He appeared in the most unexpected places, always with a plausible excuse, but I knew he was watching me. And then the accidents started. First was Daniel's flat tire. Then someone broke his windshield. Daniel said they were just coincidences, but I saw the fear in his eyes growing. In March 1970, Daniel showed me a photo someone had left on his windshield. It was a photo of Sarah, with a red X drawn over her face. On the back of the photo, there was a message. "We know where she is, and we know what you did." Daniel panicked. He said we had to stop seeing each other, that it was too dangerous. But I couldn't let him go. I couldn't go back to James knowing what it was really like to love someone. So I made a decision that would change everything. I convinced Daniel to run away together after my wedding. During the ceremony, the plan was simple. I would go through the ceremony normally, but at the moment of leaving the church, Daniel would be waiting across the street. We would flee west, start a new life away from Millfield. What we didn't calculate is that James had discovered everything. On the night before the wedding, James appeared at my house. My parents had gone out for final preparations, and I was alone. When I opened the door, his smile was different, cold, calculating. He entered uninvited and placed some photos on the kitchen table. They were photos of me and Daniel, intimate photos, taken without our knowledge. "I imagine what your parents would think of this," he said, still wearing that terrible smile. "Or what the police would think if they knew your boyfriend is a murderer." My blood ran cold. How did he know about Sarah? James laughed at my expression. He said he had hired a detective weeks before, that he knew everything, that he knew where Daniel had buried Sarah, that he had proof. Then he gave me an ultimatum. I would marry him the next day and never speak to Daniel again, or he would turn the evidence over to the police. Daniel would be arrested for murder. I had less than 24 hours to decide between saving the man I loved or condemning myself to a life of prison with a monster. June 15th, 1971. The day that should have been the happiest of my life became the beginning of my nightmare. I woke up with a feeling of dread in my stomach. During the night, I had dreamed of Sarah. She was standing at the foot of my bed, drenched with seaweed in her hair, whispering, "He will do to you what he did to me." I tried to convince myself it was just pre-wedding anxiety. But while I was getting ready, I found a letter someone had slipped under my bedroom door. The handwriting was feminine, delicate. "Don't marry him. James Whitmore killed Sarah Mitchell, and he will kill you too." My mind collapsed. If James had killed Sarah, then Daniel was innocent. But if Daniel was innocent, why had he lied about finding her dead? Why had he hidden the body? I had no time to discover the truth. In 2 hours, I would be walking to the altar. The ceremony began normally. The church packed, white flowers everywhere, the organ playing the wedding march. When I walked down the central aisle with my father, I saw James at the altar. But this time, I really saw him. His eyes showed no love. They showed possession, triumph, as if I were a trophy he had finally conquered. During the vows, my voice trembled so much that some people in the church began to whisper. James squeezed my hand tightly. So tightly I felt my fingers tingle. And then, at the moment when the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," something happened that changed everything. I saw Daniel across the street, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman I immediately recognized from the photos James had shown me. Sarah Mitchell, alive. For a moment, I thought I was going crazy. Sarah couldn't be alive. Daniel had told me she was dead. James had evidence of the murder. But there she was, clear as day, waving desperately at me. In that moment, everything clicked. James had orchestrated everything. He had discovered my relationship with Daniel and devised a plan to blackmail me. But since Sarah was alive, how had he obtained the evidence? There was no time to think. Instinctively, I let go of James's hand and ran. I lifted the skirts of my wedding dress and ran across the street under the shocked screams of the guests. Daniel opened the car door and I jumped in. Sarah was in the back seat, pale, trembling. "Drive," she whispered urgently. "Drive now, before he notices." As we fled, Sarah told me the truth. She hadn't disappeared voluntarily. James Whitmore had kidnapped her. For almost 2 years, James kept Sarah prisoner in an isolated cabin on the outskirts of Millfield. He used her to blackmail Daniel, forcing him to leave town. But Daniel refused, because of me. So James changed strategy. If he couldn't drive Daniel away, he would make me reject him voluntarily. He created false evidence, invented the murder story, blackmailed me. But Sarah had managed to escape that morning. She found Daniel, and together they came to warn me. What none of us expected is that James Whitmore wasn't just possessive and manipulative. He was much worse than we imagined. We drove for hours until we reached a motel on the border with the neighboring state. Sarah was in shock, could barely speak. When she finally calmed down, she told us details that terrified me. James hadn't kidnapped only Sarah. During the 2 years she was in captivity, he brought other women to the cabin. According to Sarah, she witnessed James torture and kill at least 2 other girls. Young women no one would look for, prostitutes, runaways, girls from broken families. He kept Sarah alive because he needed her as evidence against Daniel. But the others. Sarah described how James filmed everything. She said he had a sick obsession with documenting his crimes, and that he had commented several times about adding the perfect bride to his collection. I was the next target. We decided we had to go to the police immediately. We had Sarah's testimony. She could take us to the cabin. We had evidence. But when we arrived at the police station in the neighboring town the next morning, we discovered something terrible. James Whitmore had anticipated us. James had called the police during the night, reporting that his disturbed bride had fled with a fugitive murderer and his accomplice. When we entered the station, we were immediately detained. James had presented false evidence about Sarah's death, but this time with a twist. He claimed that Daniel and I had conspired to kill Sarah and hide the body. And there was more. James said that Sarah was an imposter, an actress Daniel had hired to convince me to run away with him. Worst of all, when the police tried to verify Sarah's identity, they discovered there were no birth records, no ID, nothing. It was as if Sarah Mitchell had never officially existed. James had been very clever. During the 2 years of captivity, he had systematically destroyed all evidence of Sarah's existence. School records, certificates, photographs, everything. We were trapped in a perfect trap. But then something happened that not even James expected. The sheriff responsible for the case was William Brooks, an honest and meticulous man. Something in James's story didn't completely convince him. Brooks decided to investigate on his own. He visited the cabin Sarah had described, investigated the records of the company where Daniel worked, talked to people in the towns he had passed through. In 3 days, Brooks had discovered the truth. James Whitmore was lying. On the night of June 18, 1971, 3 days after my escape, Sheriff Brooks called James. He said he had found evidence in the cabin and needed to ask some questions. James agreed to meet him at the station the next morning. William Brooks never arrived alive at the station. They found his car on a dangerous curve on the rural road, completely destroyed. Apparently, he had lost control and hit a tree. Instant death. But here's what the official investigation never discovered. The night before the accident, James had disappeared for 4 hours. He told his family he was settling wedding affairs. Sarah told me later that she saw James returning home that night with clothes dirty with earth and motor oil. Sheriff Brooks had discovered something in the cabin, something James couldn't allow to come to light. So he killed him. With Brooks's death, the investigation fell apart. The new sheriff, younger and less experienced, accepted James's version without question. Without solid evidence, and with the main investigator dead, the case was closed. Daniel, Sarah, and I were released, but with one condition: we couldn't return to Millfield. And so our new life began. We moved to a small town in Colorado. Daniel found work in a factory. I worked as a secretary. Sarah lived with us. She was too traumatized to live alone. For 2 years, we were almost happy, almost normal. Sarah slowly recovered from her traumas. Daniel and I married in a small civil ceremony. In 1973, our daughter Emily was born. I had almost managed to forget James Whitmore. I had almost convinced myself we were safe, until the day Sarah disappeared. For real, this time. It was September 1973. Emily was only 2 months old. Sarah had gone out shopping on a Tuesday morning and never came back. We searched everywhere. The local police treated it as a common missing person case. Young woman, history of trauma, probably had run away to start a new life. But I knew something was wrong. Sarah wouldn't have abandoned Emily, wouldn't have abandoned us. She loved us like family. A week later, they found her body in a lake 50 miles from town. The official cause of death was accidental drowning. But there was something that didn't make sense. Sarah knew how to swim very well. And why would she be at that lake alone? In the investigation, we discovered that a man had been seen in the region on the day of Sarah's disappearance. The description matched James Whitmore perfectly. When I called Millfield to confront him, I discovered something even more disturbing. James had remarried 6 months after my escape to an 18-year-old girl. Beautiful, young, innocent, exactly like I had been. And according to local records, this wasn't the first time. James had married 4 times since my escape, always to young girls, always for short periods, and all the other wives had disappeared. I began investigating on my own, obsessed with discovering what had happened to James's other wives. Jennifer Walsh, 19, married James in December 1971. Disappeared in March 1972. Official cause: ran away with a traveling salesman. Patricia Foster, 18, married James in June 1972. Died in September of the same year. Official cause: car accident on an isolated road. Mary Henderson, 20, married James in January 1973. Disappeared in April. They never found the body. Lisa Crawford. Yes, Crawford, she was Daniel's distant cousin. Married James in August 1973. Was found dead a week before Sarah disappeared. Official cause: suicide by overdose. The pattern was clear. James married young girls, kept them isolated for a few months, and then Sarah had escaped on my wedding day, but James found her. She was the only living witness to his crimes. She had to die and I realized I was also a witness. I knew about the cabin, about the kidnapping, about everything. James wasn't finished with me, he was just waiting for the right moment. From 1974, our life became a constant nightmare. We moved towns 3 times that year. Whenever we started feeling safe, strange things would happen. Strange cars appeared on our street. Silent phone calls in the middle of the night. Once, I found footprints in the mud of our garden. Footprints that led directly to Emily's bedroom window. Daniel started sleeping with a shotgun beside the bed. We installed extra locks on doors and windows. We lived like fugitives, even though we were the victims. In 1975, Daniel received a letter at work. Inside was a single photo, Emily playing at the school playground. On the back, a message, "Beautiful children grow up so fast." That night, we made a terrible decision. We had to confront James. We couldn't live running forever, especially with Emily. Daniel said he would go back to Millfield alone, that he would try to make a deal with James, maybe money, maybe a promise to never bother him again. I begged him not to go. I pleaded. I cried. But Daniel was determined. He said he loved me too much to let James terrorize us forever. He said he would do anything to protect our daughter. Those were the last words Daniel said to me. "I'll protect you both, whatever it costs." Daniel returned to Millfield on March 23, 1975. They found his body 5 days later. According to the official version, Daniel had broken into James's property during the night, apparently trying to rob him. James, in self-defense, had shot him. But I knew Daniel. He would never try to rob anyone. He had gone there to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution. James was considered a hero in town, the respectable man who had defended himself from a dangerous criminal. The same police who, years before, had supported him when he reported my escape with a murderer. No one questioned why Daniel was unarmed when he was shot. No one questioned why there were signs of prolonged struggle on his body. No one questioned why James waited 2 days to report the assault. With Daniel dead and no physical evidence against James, I was alone. A 23-year-old widow with a small daughter, living under a false identity, without family, without support. And James knew exactly where I was. A week after Daniel's funeral, I received an unexpected visit. James Whitmore appeared at my door, but he wasn't there to gloat or threaten. He was there to make me an offer. "Come back to me," he said simply. "Marry me again, raise Emily as our daughter, and I'll let the past rest. Refuse, and Emily will have an accident, just like her father." He gave me 24 hours to decide. The next day, I packed our few things and returned to Millfield with Emily in my arms. The town had changed in my absence. People looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I was the widow of the murderer, the woman who had gotten involved with criminals. James had prepared everything perfectly. He told the town I had returned repentant, that I recognized my mistakes and wanted a second chance, that he, in his Christian goodness, was willing to forgive me. We married in a small private ceremony in August 1975. Only our families present. No one questioned why I looked more like a ghost than a bride. And then began the darkest period of my life. James wasn't just controlling, he was meticulous in his cruelty. He never hurt me physically where marks could be seen, never yelled at me in public. To others, we were an exemplary couple. But at home, I was his prisoner. He controlled every minute of my day, every person I spoke to. Emily was always under his supervision. He used her as leverage for my good behavior. And during the nights when Emily slept, James told me about his other victims. In detail. It was his form of psychological torture. He described how he had killed Sheriff Brooks, how he had tortured the other wives, how he planned to do the same to me when Emily grew up enough to not need a mother anymore. For 5 years, I lived in this hell. But secretly, I was preparing. James thought he had complete control over me, but he underestimated my determination. During all this time, I was collecting evidence. I secretly recorded conversations using a small recorder I hid in my bra. I photographed documents when he wasn't looking. I mapped every entrance and exit of the house, every habit of his, every weakness, and most importantly, I discovered where he hid his trophies. James maintained a secret basement under the house. He thought I didn't know of its existence, but I had discovered the hidden entrance behind a false bookshelf. Inside were terrible things: photographs, personal objects of the victims, and most disturbing, videotapes. James had filmed everything. Every kidnapping, every torture, every murder. He watched these tapes as entertainment. It was these tapes that sealed his fate. In 1980, when Emily turned 7, James began making disturbing comments about her. He said she was growing beautiful, that soon she would be a woman. That night, I made a decision. James Whitmore had to die. There were no more alternatives. The police would never believe the word of an ex-fugitive against a respectable citizen. And I couldn't risk him hurting Emily, so I used his own arrogance against him. James had the habit of drinking bourbon every night while watching his tapes in the basement. It was his macabre ritual, his way of reliving his crimes. For weeks, I began adding small amounts of sleeping pills to his bourbon. Doses so small, he just thought he was getting more relaxed with the drink. On the night of November 14th, 1980, I added a much larger dose. James passed out in the basement, as I had planned, but I didn't stop there. I lit a match and threw it at the tapes, all of them. I watched as the evidence of his crimes turned to ash. Then I dragged unconscious James out of the basement and placed him on the living room sofa. I broke a bottle of bourbon beside him, spilled the liquid on his clothes. James always smoked cigars. I left one lit near the curtain. In minutes, the flames spread. I took Emily, who slept deeply, and left the house. I drove to the motel on the road and waited. The fire department took 40 minutes to arrive. Enough time for the entire house to turn to ash. James Whitmore officially died in an accidental fire caused by cigarette negligence while intoxicated. No one questioned it. No one investigated deeply. I was the grieving widow, the woman who had tragically lost her husband. The community supported me, consoled me. Finally, I was free. Emily and I started a new life. She grew up never knowing the truth about James, thinking he had just been her stepfather who died in a tragic accident. I legally changed our names. Eleanor Morrison became Ellen Matthews. Emily became Emma. We moved to the other side of the country, to a town where no one knew us. For 20 years, we lived in peace. Emily graduated, married, gave me beautiful grandchildren. I built a respectable life, worked as a librarian, got involved in the community, but the ghosts never completely abandoned me. I still dreamed of Daniel every night, of Sarah drowning, of James's other wives I couldn't save. And sometimes, very rarely, I swore I saw James in crowds, always in the corner of my eye, always disappearing when I looked directly. I told myself it was paranoia, trauma, that James was dead and burned, that I had made sure of it myself. Until 2001, when I received a letter that changed everything. The letter arrived on my 50th birthday. No sender, no postal stamp. Someone had personally delivered it to my mailbox. Inside was a single photo, the facade of the church where I should have married James in 1971. On the back, a message that chilled my blood. Happy birthday, dear wife. Shall we still remember the vows you never completed? The handwriting was James's. I recognized it perfectly. But this was impossible. I had killed James 20 years before. I had seen the house burn, had gone to his funeral. Unless. I spent weeks investigating secretly. I called Millfield pretending to be a genealogist interested in the Whitmore family history. What I discovered terrified me. The man who died in the 1980 fire had never been positively identified. The body was too charred for visual identification, and DNA tests weren't common at the time. The identification had been based only on location. A dead man in James Whitmore's house was presumably James Whitmore. But what if it wasn't James who died that night? What if it was another victim, another man James had brought to the house? What if James had escaped and spent 20 years planning his revenge? I began receiving more letters, one per month, always on the same day, always with the same handwriting. I miss our nightly conversations in the basement. Emily is looking more and more like you at the same age. I wonder if your grandchildren will inherit your beautiful eyes. Each letter was a veiled threat, a reminder that he knew where I was, knew everything about my family. I hired a private detective to investigate. I wanted to know if James was really alive, where he was, how he had survived. The detective, a man named Robert Kane, began investigating Millfield records. In 2 weeks, he had discovered disturbing inconsistencies. First, the body found in James's house in 1980 had different height and weight from James's medical records. Second, a week before the fire, James had withdrawn all money from his bank accounts. Third, a neighbor had seen James leaving home on the night of the fire, hours before the fire started. But before Kane could deliver the complete report to me, they found his body in the river. Accidental drowning, according to police. Except Kane knew how to swim perfectly, and there were signs of struggle. Kane's death confirmed my worst fears. James was alive, and he was eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. I began investigating on my own, more cautiously this time. What I discovered was a terrible pattern of deaths extending over decades. 1981. Margaret Foster, sister of Patricia Foster, one of James's dead wives, died in a car accident a week after visiting Millfield, looking for information about her sister. 1984. Thomas Walsh, Jennifer Walsh's father, was found dead at home. Natural heart attack, according to the death certificate. But he was in perfect health and had hired a lawyer to reopen the investigation of his daughter's disappearance. 1987. Dr. Morrison, the doctor who had examined the charred body in 1980 and questioned the identification, died in an accidental fall down his house stairs. The pattern was clear. Anyone who questioned the official version of events, anyone who investigated too deeply, ended up dead. James was protecting his secret for decades, and now, with the letters, he was making it clear to me that I would be next unless I did what he wanted. The letters continued arriving regularly until 2010. Then they stopped abruptly. For 2 years, I heard nothing from James. I began wondering if he had finally died, if I was finally free. But in 2012, Emily called me crying. Someone had tried to kidnap my granddaughter Sophie outside school, an elderly man in a dark car. Sophie managed to escape, but was terrified. The description Sophie gave of the man matched James perfectly, just older. That night, I found a new letter in my mailbox. What a beautiful granddaughter you have. It would be a shame if she had the same fate as the others. I realized James had changed strategy. He no longer wanted to punish me directly. He wanted me to suffer watching my family be destroyed. And that's when I made the most difficult decision of my life. I had 2 options: continue running forever, letting James terrorize my family, or confront him one last time. I chose to confront him. In October 2012, I returned to Millfield for the first time in 32 years. The town had shrunk, many houses abandoned, many young people who had left seeking better opportunities. But the house where James had lived was still there, and someone was living in it. I spent days observing the house from afar. During the day, it seemed empty, but at night I saw a dim light in the basement. On the 3rd night, I saw a silhouette in the window. A silhouette I immediately recognized, even after so many years. James Whitmore was alive, and he was waiting for me. That night, armed with a pistol I had bought illegally, I entered the house. What I found inside was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. The house was exactly as I remembered, but with a sweet and nauseating smell in the air. The smell of decomposition. I followed the smell to the basement. The door was open, as if James was inviting me to go down. Down there, I found James sitting in a chair with his back to the stairs. He seemed to have aged decades in 20 years. White hair, bent body, yellowish skin. But when he turned to look at me, his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, full of an evil that time had not diminished. "Hello, dear wife," he said calmly. "You took a long time to come visit me." I pointed the gun at him and demanded answers. How had he survived? Who was the man who died in the house? Why was he threatening my family? James laughed, a dry laugh, without humor. "You really think you were clever, don't you? Burning the house, faking my death." Then he told me the truth. The man who died in the fire was Thomas Henderson, father of Mary Henderson, one of the missing wives. Thomas had discovered the truth about James and had gone to confront him. James killed him and used the body to stage his own death. He had planned everything perfectly, even my murder attempt. He knew I would try to kill him. He was waiting for it. But the most terrible revelation was yet to come. "You know," James said casually, "you weren't the only one I let escape." He pointed to the corner of the basement. There was a series of photographs hanging on the wall like trophies. I recognized some of the women, his former wives. But there were other photos, older women, and in the center of all, a recent photo of Emily. "Your daughter is beautiful," James whispered. "As beautiful as you were. And she has a daughter too, doesn't she? Sophie?" James then revealed his final plan. He had spent decades studying my family, learning our habits, our fears. He knew I would do anything to protect Emily and Sophie, and he wanted me to choose. I could shoot him right there, kill him, and end everything. But if I did, pre-written letters would automatically be sent to his associates in various cities. Letters containing forged evidence that would incriminate Emily for various crimes. Or I could agree to return to being his wife, let him complete our family by incorporating Emily and Sophie into his collection. There was a third option, which James considered more fun. I would kill myself right there, in front of him, and he would leave Emily alone. But Sophie would be raised by him as his heir, taught to continue his legacy. I looked at James in that nauseating basement, surrounded by evidence of decades of murders, and realized there was a fourth option, an option he hadn't considered. I agreed to his suicide proposal. I said I would kill myself to protect my family. James was ecstatic. He grabbed a camera to film my death, one more trophy for his macabre collection. I brought the gun to my head. James was radiant, anticipating my death. And then, in the last second, I changed the target. I shot the fuel can that James kept in the basement to burn evidence. The explosion was instantaneous. The basement became hell in seconds. I ran to the stairs while the flames spread. James tried to follow me, but his years of sedentary life had made him slow. I heard his screams as I escaped the house. Screams that turned into maniacal laughter. Even burning alive, James was laughing. This time, I made sure James was really dead. I waited outside until the firefighters arrived, saw them remove the charred body. But something was still wrong. In the days following, the fire, strange things began happening in Millfield. People reported sightings of James walking through the town at night. Others said they heard laughter coming from the burned house. And the deaths continued. In 2013, Mary Collins, the postal worker who had delivered my letters, died in a bizarre work accident. In 2014, Joe Matthews, the motel owner where James used to take his victims, was found dead in his own motel. Official cause: accidental overdose. In 2015, Sandra Wilson, a local journalist who was investigating Millfield's mysteries, disappeared. They never found the body. It was as if James's death had released something worse, as if his hatred was so intense it transcended death itself. And then, in 2020, I received a letter that confirmed my worst fears. The letter arrived on the 50th anniversary of my wedding escape, June 15th, 2021. But this time, the handwriting was different, younger, feminine. "Dear Grandmother Eleanor," the letter said, "it's time for you to know the truth about our family." The letter was signed, "With love, Sophie Whitmore." My granddaughter had discovered everything. Worse yet, she had discovered that James wasn't dead. According to Sophie's letter, James had survived the 2012 fire, injured, burned, but alive. And during his last years of life, he had sought her out. Sophie was a teenager when James made contact. He presented himself as her lost grandfather, told distorted versions of our story, painted me as the villain who had destroyed the family, and gradually he indoctrinated her. James died of natural causes in 2019, but before dying, he passed all his secrets to Sophie. All the details of the murders, all the techniques, all the contacts. My own granddaughter had become the heir to James Whitmore's legacy. Sophie's letter ended with an invitation. "Come to Millfield on June 15th. Let's finish what you started 50 years ago."